the microphone kicks on. There we go. Before I get started, because I always forget once I get started to mention things like this, but I have back there in the back on your way out, if you would, take one or more of these. This is 7 ways that evolution defies observational science. I was a biology teacher my last 11 years of teaching. We're a biology teacher at Payson High School. And when I retired, I started really getting the passion for the creation science ministry, and I'll tell you what really lit my fire. That's number 1 on my list tonight. And so on this is also some trustworthy young earth creationist websites that you can go to get your questions answered. They have search boxes, especially the first 2, Answer in Genesis, Institute of Creation Research. Type in any question on their search box, you'll get videos, DVD clips, magazine articles, book chapters, all that kind of stuff to answer your questions. Because it's not hard to stump this chump with questions, because as a retired biology teacher, I've learned by research, by going to these places myself and getting the answers to my questions. But I'm just so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be able to do this, that the Lord's given me the health to continue doing this. This month has probably been one of the busiest months of my church teaching career, and I've got 10 preparations in 30 days. This is the 9th one. And so, hopefully I can hold my thoughts together tonight, because I've done 2 in the last 3 days. So we'll go ahead and get started. That's all you need to know about me. Is I'm a retired biology teacher who got really passionate about the creation science just about the time I was retiring. I also worked for the Forest Service up until 2009. That's what I did in the summertime, but then I continued that a few years after I quit teaching. Taught at the Christian school for 1.5 years, taught homeschoolers a Christian biology class for 2 years. So this has been something that the Lord has used in my life to hopefully benefit a lot of other Christians around me. So tonight we're going to talk about 8 ways that science verifies biblical creation as superior to the microbe to man theory of evolution. And this is going to be a lot of stuff. So at the end, I'm going to connect you to where you can see the more expanded versions of these 8 different talks that I kind of took the highlights of. Just usually we deal with what Mike was talking about before, symbiotic relationships, and you focus in on this one little area. And so it occurred to me, I'm always trying to think of some new idea, So it occurred to me that nobody's ever kind of given an overview of just some of the highlights that gives credence to our view that the Word of God is true, is to be trusted, is to be used in living our lives in this culture today. So that's what we're here for, to learn these truths, to be able to spread these truths to those around us, to take a stand in our culture for the truth of God. 2 Timothy, we read, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. But you be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, and fulfill your ministry." So that's what I'm doing. This is what God's called me to do. I have a testimony on the website I'll connect you to later, where I give my testimony how I just started off being a physical education teacher, how God brought me into the science area as a biology minor. I became a biology teacher, took a bunch more courses, and I can just step by step, God brought me to this place. This is my ministry. I'm going to do the work that God's given me to do tonight, and I hope it blesses you. And we know that in our culture today, this type of a talk won't be tolerated in probably, I hate to say it, the vast majority of churches. So I'm thankful for this one that will promote this. Colossians 2:8 says, "Beware lest any man cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ." In the theory of evolution, is exactly what this is saying. It's according to the tradition of men and the basic principles of the world, and it's against Christ. The theory was made up to take God out of the equation. And yet, in today's world, we got Christians trying to bring the two together. The one that hates Christianity, and they're trying to make those scientists look like they're right in some of the areas that we'll talk about tonight. I have great confidence in what I say because in 2010 I took a 3.5-month tour with Dr. Rick Oliver, and his ministry is called Confound the Wise Ministries. It's on that paper. He almost died at Mount St. Helens the day it blew. He was flying in there on a helicopter. He's got a great testimony. But for 3.5 months I traveled with him, and he's heard all my talk, well, except for the last 2 I did, it was since then. And so he verified especially the part about the radiometric dating techniques I'm going to share tonight. I wanted to be sure that what I had heard was accurate, what I'd heard and read. And he was a secular scientist for 10 years, and he verified what I had heard as true, so I can present it and know that I'm not teaching anything that's shady or not quite right. That's a jail cell. That's in Wilsey, Kansas. When we were on our tour, we were at a youth camp in Wilsey, Kansas, and I saw that and I took a picture of it, but I was thinking about it later on, and the Lord just kind of said to me in that still, quiet voice that he speaks into our minds sometimes, he says, Pete, when you're in that jail cell, you know you're in a prison. You know you're a captive. But there's all kinds of people in this world today that have no idea that they've been held captive by a theory that is not only a lie, it's not scientific. And so I've always included this because I'm going to show you tonight how evolutionists can look right at the truth, and that they can't admit the truth. They have to just deny the truth when it's right in front of them, because if they didn't deny it, they'd have to admit they were wrong, and they just don't go there. And many times there's a veil. We'll read about that in a little bit. So just the war of the worldviews is, we got the Bible, God's Word, we got literature that comes off of that dictates our and helps us to understand our worldview. And then we have materialism, evolution, naturalism, all these ones where nature, man are the ruling things in it. And they each have their own literature, and I always want to show people that National Geographic drawing, they found some bones, probably a couple bones. They tell the illustrator, make it look kind of human, make it look kind of ape, so that people will think that they came from a common ancestor with the apes. And they give you that to visually show you that this transition occurred. It's always a drawing, okay? It's always hypothetical, and we'll talk more about that later. So we got evidence for creation, and we got evidence for evolution. It's the same evidence, like the layers at the Grand Canyon. We got the same evidence. You look at the Grand Canyon, you see the layers. Well, the evolutionists think it was a lot of time and just a little bit of water that somehow went around both sides of the butte in the middle of the Grand Canyon. I don't know how that's supposed to happen. But anyway, I don't know much about geology, but I've learned enough to know that it just doesn't explain the long age view, doesn't explain the Grand Canyon. All those layers, look at how smooth that layer is. I'm going to show you a bunch of layers later where there's no evidence of erosion coming in from the side of the canyon. And there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about it. And then, of course, we think it was a lot of water in a little bit of time that cut the Grand Canyon. Okay, there's 2 types of science, so let's get it straight, that operational, observational science that you do in the lab. You got test tubes, you got flasks, you got all this apparatus, and you're testing stuff, and you're coming up with new technology. Creationists and evolutionists do that the same. The evolutionists will not admit that. They say that we don't do science, but that's wrong. We do it, we report it, they don't accept it, but that doesn't mean we didn't do it, we didn't do it right. So the one that we really disagree on, however, this is where the real rub is historical science, where you dig up the fossil and you have to interpret it according to your worldview. So depending on which of those two worldviews you have, you're interpreting the evidence. And that's where we get the big rub. That's where we get the big disagreement. So tonight, we're dealing with, what's happened in the past. Because evolution isn't happening today. We don't see evolution happening, which is the first one I want to talk about. This is the number one here is the biblical concept of kinds for living things, is what I learned in about 2005. That really, as a biology teacher, I always knew that what the book said was evidence for evolution was not actual evidence. It was, made up stuff, to put it kindly. And so I found out about the concept of kinds, and now, before I couldn't explain an alternative, but now it just hit me. This is it. This is how I know that all animals stay the same, but they're different within that family or kind. I'll go through more of that in a minute. Hopefully you've had time to look at the other things here, but I'm going to go through them one by one if you haven't had a chance to see them all. So the biblical concept of one kind, which is usually family on the 7-level classification system of living organisms, can only reproduce other members of that kind. Now for the children here tonight, this first section is geared kind of for you, so that you can understand this basic truth and remember it, because especially if you ever have to go to public school, you'll be told something different, okay? So if I ask all the kids here that when dogs have babies, what are they going to have when they have a baby? Are they going to have a cat? No. Are they going to have a horse? No. We know they're going to have another dog, don't we? It's not that hard, because we've seen animals through plants and reproduction all these years, and we've always seen that dogs reproduce other dogs. We've never seen an exception to it. And dogs do change. 2 wolf-like animals came off the ark, and now we have all these varieties of dogs, but they're still dogs. And we actually, for most of them, we know how their lineage of how they came into being through just little changes that people did and that also nature did. So in Genesis chapter 1, it's after their kind or after his kind 10 times, and that's the key, that families of organisms, no matter what it is, will always have something else of its own kind. So we started with 2 wolf-like dogs, and through time we came up with almost a mouse, but it's still a dog, a Chihuahua. The key here is no new information was added. It lost information to go from the wolf-like animal to the Chihuahua. So if you try to take 2 Chihuahuas and mate them, does anybody expect a wolf-like animal to come from that offspring? No, of course not. But we could theoretically take 2 wolves or wolf-like animals and through artificial selection and everything get the Chihuahua again, because the genes for the Chihuahua were there in the beginning. By taking other dominant genes away, you end up with this little recessive thing. So they're cute. They can be annoying, but they're cute. So if evolution is true, we should find amazing transitional creatures. Okay, I just got to tell you, in my biology book that I taught with at the high school, they had these things that were supposed to be transitional creatures. They were no more transitional creatures than the ones I'm about to show you. Kids, these are photoshopped. These are not real. Sometimes I have kids that just don't understand the difference, and I want them to know that. So what we will never find is we'll never find a sparrow boxer. Except somebody told me one time, wait, that's a bird dog. Sparrow boxer. What do cows produce when they have offspring? Well, we always know they're going to have other cows, don't we? I mean, it's never been an exception. No reason to believe anything else could happen. So you'll never see the cat cow. What do cats produce? Well, other cats. Duh. We'll never see the tiger bunny. We'll never see the tiger owl. Or my favorite is the buttercat. Well, what about horses? What do horses produce? Well, they have other horses. We have little bitty horses on the earth today. We have great big horses on the earth today. The evolutionists have taken little bitty skeletons and great big skeletons and tried to make them into an evolutionary line that if you go to all the museums that have horses in them, it's all mixed up different things in different museums. They don't even have a common story. And of course, there's no evolution if you got little ones on the earth today and big ones on the earth today. How can you say that's evolution? You can't. But they don't have anything else to say, so they have to put that out there. So you'll never see the zebraroo. And chimpanzees, what do they produce? Well, other chimpanzees. They're cute, they have some interesting characteristics, but they're nowhere near what we are, even though we're supposed to have a common ancestor, or at least the ape family. So you'll never see the catrilla. Thank goodness. Now this is a bacteria, and Charles Darwin and the other people in his time didn't have real good microscopes. They didn't understand that those little blobs that they saw in their crude microscopes had these structures that we can see under the electron microscope. They didn't know that they had ribosomes to synthesize proteins. They didn't know that they had DNA in there for reproduction. They have a flagellum for movement. They have a plasma membrane that allows certain substances in and the other substances it doesn't want to go out selectively. It's a very complex organism, even though it's simple in the order, of the complexity of life. It's still very complex. Even though it's simple life, it's still very complex. Well, they didn't understand that. But bacteria, if you're going to have one kind of organism turn to another kind of organism, this is the best candidate. It's only got one strand of DNA. If that strand of DNA gets mutated and it successfully reproduces, the offspring have to get the mutation. So you'd think that over 58,000 generations in the Linsky experiment, that something would happen to E. coli bacteria. So, he had 10 to the 14th power rough number of cells, and he had 25 years, an estimated $4 million of our taxpayer money, and all kinds of people helping him, and he's called the man who bottled evolution in more than 50 publications. So what did he find? Well, right there where it says 12 replicate populations, that'd be the same thing as saying that a collie is a replicate population of the wolf. It's still E. coli. They still call them E. coli bacteria, but they all look different. After 58,000 generations, they call that evolution. That's not evolution. That's just simple adaptation, natural selection, picks out certain traits. It's still an E. coli bacteria after 58,000 generations, and yet they call him the man who bottled evolution. Still E. coli bacteria. Sorry, it's not evolution. So here's a quiz, kids. Okay, let's see how you do. Okay, remember evolution means change. Okay, what do fossil turtles look like? You got a real turtle and a fossil turtle. Do they look the same? They look not exactly the same. One's a little rounder than the other one. We'd expect to see some minor differences because you have different species of turtles. They're still cousins, but over time, even hundreds of years, you would see slight changes in appearance, so that shouldn't surprise us. And there's a wolf spider. Any of you ever seen a wolf spider in your garage or someplace? We have them here in Payson. They look the same. Starfish look the same today as they did 400 million years ago, fossils. The oldest bat, 50 million years ago, does it look the same as modern day bats? Well, yeah, it does. Then we got crabs. They look the same after what evolutionists would say were hundreds of millions of years. Shrimp, same thing. Dragonflies. Think how fast that would have to be fossilized to keep from just deteriorating out in the air. Can't lay there for millions of years to get covered up. It's got to be covered up quickly and rapidly by some catastrophic event. The horseshoe crab, there are some scientists that say that these are 1 to 2 billion years old, so there's 1 to 2 billion years of change for you. Not much. Seahorses and the coelacanth. Well, the coelacanth has a story behind it. It's a 400 million year old fossil, they say, by the rock layer that it's in, of course. And so they make a representation of it. And they made a story to go with it. So here's the evolutionary story for some period of time. See those big, thick fins? Well, they lived in the shallow, warm ocean. They used those fins to crawl out onto the shore. And over time, they developed somehow the ability to breathe air on the land. And over time, they became the first amphibians. Well, back, I believe it was the 1950s, that somebody went to a fish market in Indonesia, and they knew what this was supposed to look like, and they saw these laying in the fish market. They asked the person, where did you find that? The person said, well, everybody here gets them all the time. They're just out there, we just go out. So they took them out there, and so since then, we know that coelacanths are alive today. They live in the deep part of the ocean. They use their fins for what all fish use their fins for in the water. And they're part of a family of fish called the lobe-finned fishes. They just have big, thick fins. It doesn't mean they ever walked on land or were going to walk on land. They just have big, thick fins. God kind of created them that way, it appears. And so you'll never see the birdfish, and that evolutionary story got washed away. So where's the evolution? Didn't see any, did we? I'm going to show you a few quotes by evolutionists now, because we're dealing with the concept of kinds here, okay? And so, the organisms on the earth are supposed to start simple, get complex. That's the story that the evolutionists have told us. So Dan McShay said, everybody knows that organisms get better as they evolve, they get more advanced, more modern, and less primitive. And everybody knows that organisms get more complex as they evolve. The only trouble with what everybody knows is that there is no evidence that it's true. Spoken by an evolutionary biologist from the University of Michigan. Wow. You mean they've been giving us an illusion all this time? That's a street drawing. That's a flat street with a painting on it. And this is exactly, as we go through this, you're going to see time after time where evolution is painting a false picture of reality and telling you that if you don't have the brains to understand this, you're just not a very intelligent person. The foreknowledge of the Lord is clearly seen in the scriptures as he cares for his people who follow his word. So there's something evolution doesn't do. Well, they predict the future, but it doesn't turn out the way they want it to. But the Bible, we have this record where God told the people how to take care of germs before we knew there was germs. And it's given in these chapters. And it tells you not only how to take the people and help them, it tells you how to clean up their clothes, how to clean up their dwelling. It tells you all these things that they could not have known in that time, but God knew. And he told them, because the law was given for our benefit. A lot of people think the law is just something there to constrict us and hold us back. No, he gave it to us as a loving benefit. In 1847, Dr. Semmelweis of Austria showed that doctors washing their hands in running water reduced birth mother deaths from 30% to 2%. He also showed how this practice and the use of lime water as a disinfectant also reduced other diseases in the infant babies. Too bad the doctors weren't following the biblical guidelines for sanitation. Countless lives could have been saved. This is 1847. This is a lot before that. Whoever hath not rinsed his hands in water conveys uncleanness by his touch. Spreads germs. So kids, when your parents tell you, go wash your hands with soap, please do it so that you're not spreading germs, because the Bible tells us to. Numbers says, command the people of Israel to move from the camp anyone who has a skin disease or a discharge or who has become ceremonially unclean by touching a dead person. This command applies to both men and women alike. Remove them so they will not defile the camp in which I live among them. Quarantine didn't come about from medical practices until way after that. Could have saved a bunch of lives. You must have this one kind of tickled me. I never realized this was here. I've read the Bible many times and somehow I just never really caught this one. You must have a designated area outside the camp where you can go relieve yourself. Each of you must have a spade as part of your equipment. Whenever you go to relieve yourself, dig a hole with the spade and cover the excrement. And we now know that if you don't do that, you're going to have all kinds of diseases running through the area where that's unsanitary. And so God was even, way ahead of science in that area too. You must never have sexual relations with a close relative, for I am the Lord. Well, why did he do that? He did that because he knew about mutations, and he knew they were harmful, and he knew that after 2,500 years there were enough of them that if you married a first cousin, you ran a chance of the mutation showing up in your offspring. You have to have the mutational gene from both parents for it to show up in the offspring. So if one parent has a mutational gene, but the other one has the dominant gene for that trait, the dominant gene will cover up that mutation. It won't show up in the offspring. But you marry a first cousin, you got the same mutations in your genetic code. Now you've got a chance of that showing up in your offspring. God wanted to protect us from that. That's why he made this law. Well, geological features show evidence of a worldwide flood and rapid deposition of the geologic layers. So did it happen over a really long time, or did it happen really quickly is the question. So we're going to look at some evidence, but first of all, let's consider this. A lot of Christians today say the flood was local. But if the flood was local, why did Noah have to build an ark? He could have walked to the other side of the mountain. Why did God send animals to the ark? So they could escape death. There would have been other animals on the other side that could have reproduced and replaced those. Why was the ark big enough to hold all kinds of land vertebrate animals that have ever existed at that time in that place? If only Mesopotamian animals were aboard, the ark could have been much smaller. Why would birds have been sent on board? These could have simply winged across to the next mountain range. Yeah. It wasn't local, it was worldwide. That's what the Bible clearly says, because it says the waters rose 15 cubits above the mountains. Water seeks its own level. It couldn't rise to cover the local mountains while leaving the rest of the world untouched. And probably the biggest theological issue is that people who did not happen to be living in that vicinity would not be affected by it. They would have escaped God's judgment on sin, which is why the flood was sent. If this happened, what did Christ mean when he likened the coming judgment of all men to the judgment of all men in Matthew 24, 37 to 39, where in the days of Noah they were eating and drinking and marrying, living life as normal until the day that the flood came. So a partial judgment in Noah's day means a partial judgment to come. That doesn't sound, that we know that's not right. And yet that's what you're doing. That's what you're opening the door to when you say it's a local flood. But all the people ran into that one valley and stayed there so that they would be drowned? I don't think so. God would have repeatedly broken his promise never to send such a flood again, because we know that we have floods every year, local floods. He never destroyed all the life on the earth by a flood. He won't do it again. We got a promise. Well, as far as observational science goes, if there was a worldwide flood, we should find billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. Yeah, we do. It's there. No denying it. We also have worldwide sedimentary layers. This one is the one that I was showing you in the Grand Canyon there, and it spreads over most of the United States. Now, there's places where it got eroded away, so it's not there. But it was once there until it got eroded away. And we find evidence of the same type of sandstone in other places. and even under the ocean floor. So I'm going to show you now. Remember the smooth layers I showed you at the Grand Canyon? And I think the next one is the Grand Canyon too, but this is the Badlands of South Dakota. There's one of these is from the petrified forest, the area of the petrified forest and the Grand Canyon. But look how the layers are smooth. You don't see any, if this was covered up by sediment, you would see all kinds of creases in the sedimentary layer. It wouldn't be smooth, would it? But all those layers are smooth where you can see them. And in the Grand Canyon, they're pretty smooth layers. There's just no side canyons cutting through the layers. This is the one I believe that's up by petrified forest. And this one in Washington, they observed it form in less than 6 days. See, we have found out through experimentation and observation that rapidly moving water lays down these smooth layers. Okay? And then if you have another event where water comes through that still soft layers, then it cuts through and exposes those layers with there wasn't anything coming from the side. That's why there's no evidence of the side erosion. Mount St. Helens is just a wonderful example that we watched it happen. It laid down smooth layers. It laid down a canyon 1/40th the size of the Grand Canyon in less than a week. This was laid down in hours and then cut through. One of my dreams was always to go to Spirit Lake at Mount St. Helens, and on that trip with Dr. Rick Oliver, I got to do that. But on the lake back there, you can see, hopefully you can see it, there's logs. There were still 400,000 in 2010 out of the 1 million that they think they started with. That there's still 400,000 logs, and they are slowly getting waterlogged. Certain types of trees have mostly disappeared, and some species of trees are still there, just depending on how fast they absorb the water. But they're going down, they're embedding in the bottom, they're being covered up by sediment. We're watching something called polystrate fossils in their early stages. We're watching how it happens. And all over the world, if you Google polystrate fossils, you'll see these tree trunks that go up through multiple layers of strata, just as preserved on top as they were on the bottom. Some of them are even laying over diagonally like this, that if they weren't covered up all at once, they would just fallen down, but they didn't. So they had to be put there all at once, okay? So we're watching this happen. We're observing it happen. And it verifies what we think happened, that it was all covered up quickly by that worldwide flood. And then we see bent sedimentary rock. Well, rock doesn't bend after it hardens, it breaks. And we see bent sedimentary rock with no evidence of heating, which can cause rock to bend, but there's no evidence of the heating in these rocks in the Grand Canyon. So you can see here, it's almost a 90-degree turn. It didn't break. Had to all be soft. And theologically, if God cursed the earth with thorns after Adam sinned, then thorns and thistles, shouldn't have been there before Adam and Eve. But if you look in the fossil layers, you see in a layer that's 408 million to 360 million years old, we got fossil thorns, which is way below any human type fossil. So that would mean that the thorns were there first, which would make the Bible a liar if that was true. So, we have to think theologically as well as, in the scientific terms. Number 4, there is evidence from many cultures all over the world that dinosaurs and humans have coexisted in the not very distant past. Matter of fact, there's a lot more evidence for that than what the secular scientists have for them not. The King James Version of the Bible, translated into English in 1611, the word dinosaur was invented in 1841. That's why you don't find the word dinosaur in the Bible. And there's been Christians who denied that there was ever dinosaurs because the word dinosaur is not in the King James Version of the Bible. It's a very simple solution to that problem. So hopefully people do a little bit more research before they take that kind of a stand. So yes, we have other words there, which we'll get to in a minute. Computer, locomotive, and rocket were in that 1828 dictionary, but dinosaur wasn't. That's kind of interesting. Well, we have evidence of dinosaurs all over the earth in the sedimentary layers. This is the Paluxy riverbed, famous dinosaur tracks there. And this is in China, which is just a huge mound of disarticulated dinosaur bones. We have this at Dinosaur National Monument, also up in the corner of northeast corner of Utah and by Colorado there. And huge deposit where it looked like they were just caught up in a big whirlpool and disarticulated and then dumped it with all that sediment right in one spot. You know, and it's hard to deny it. You know, people actually said Satan planted those there. Okay, well, I don't think so. I think we have evidence of a huge flood that carried them. We don't know where they died, but we know where they got buried. So this is mummified dinosaur skin. It's not fossilized, it's mummified. Stored, it was in a cool, dry place. But I doubt if it's 65 million years old. This is the foot of a real dinosaur. It belongs to a Megalopteryx, and its skin is considered the best preserved dinosaur tissue to date. And then we have a stunning blow to evolutionists' age-old story about dinosaurs. And they were picking up a femur of a T-Rex. How many of you have heard about the dinosaur red blood cells and connective tissue? How many of you have heard of that? Okay, more people here than there was in Pine Top Lakeside, but if you've never heard of it before, it's now well documented. We're finding more and more, and scientists are actually looking for it, whereas at first it was discovered by accident when they were picking up a femur late at night by helicopter. It broke in half. They see this fresh looking stuff in there. It looks like it came from the meat market, and it's got connective tissue that you can stretch and it'll snap back. That's supposed to be 65 million years old. I don't think so. And these are actually red blood cells, and the lady who found this, the scientist who found this and reported it and tested it and found out they really were red blood cells and not bacteria, boy, was her boss mad at her and all the other secular scientists along with them. And I don't have it in this presentation, but on my other one about dinosaurs, I have a team that actually sequenced dinosaur DNA and found out it wasn't like bird DNA or reptile DNA. And they got squelched so hard by the scientists that from that time that article was written until a few years ago, there had never been another team of scientists that even dared try doing that, because if you find the wrong thing, you get hurt by your fellow scientists. Not physically, but professionally. So this is the knight killing the last dragon, saving the king's daughter that had drawn the lot to be sacrificed to the dragon. So dragon is one of the words. I don't have behemoth and leviathan in here, but behemoth's in chapter 40 of Job, leviathan's in chapter 41. Great big animals feared by man, probably types of dinosaurs. And brass carvings on the tomb of Bishop Bell in the 15th century. Well, these guys, you know, they didn't have books to say, well, let's draw a dinosaur like we saw in that book the other day. You know, apparently there were still some of these alive that people had seen, and they decided to put those on for decoration on his tomb. That's, I understand it's now covered up by a carpet so that people don't see it when they go in there. And the Chinese Zodiac. Now, kids, we do not believe in zodiacs or any of that kind of stuff, but in the Chinese Zodiac, every animal on there is a real animal. The only one you would question would be dragon, and why should we? I think that when they made this up, I think dragons were real to them. It's all over that culture. I've got a bunch more slides of that on my full presentation. And this is from South America. They look like they came out of one of our books. I mean, we make some really good models apparently, because if they saw these and we make models based on bones that look like these, we must be doing a good job of that. This is another South American culture. This one's back to China, and this is a 2,000-year-old therizinosaur, and very accurate. And this is a cave drawing in Utah. Michael told me he's seen this one several times. It's in the southwest corner, southeast corner, yep. And you can hike to it and see it. This is like a mosaic, but it's from Egypt. And these guys, it looks like they're hunting dinosaurs. Well, remember after the flood, food might have been a little bit scarce, and God gave them the ability to, he permitted them now to eat meat. So dinosaurs would have some good meat on them, wouldn't they, if you could take them down. And this actually looks like some of our Native Americans might have been hunting those dinosaurs also. And who can blame them? Because, man, those dinosaur legs are so good. They taste just like frog legs. And no, Photoshop, kids, there's no such thing. Okay. So my family and I, we have been to the representation of Noah's Ark in Kentucky. Just, one of the things about dinosaurs, they say, how could you get dinosaurs on the ark? It's too small. Well, they don't know how big the ark was. It's humongous. And you go inside and dinosaurs fit in there easily. They didn't have to take the biggest dinosaurs. They could have taken juveniles. It just made sense that they would. It'd be longer reproduction life after the flood was over. And so that they have all these representations of that, how they got the food in there and the water in there. No problem at all. The Ark feasibility study said they thought that there was room for thousands of people if they would have repented and got on there. Psalm 91:13, the young lion and the dragon shall thou trample underfoot. Sounds like a real animal. He shall slay the dragon that is in the sea, and he swallowed me up like a dragon. Sounds like some big, fearsome animals. Probably what we would call dinosaurs. Dinosaur, by the way, means terrible lizard. That's what it means. Well, let's go to radiometric dating. I'm going to show you that techniques have been shown to be highly inaccurate, and they rely on several unprovable assumptions. I don't go to the assumptions here. That's on my other presentation. But we get discordant or disagreeing, you might say, dates for the same sample using various methods or the same method on various parts of the same sample. So here's various parts of the same sample. One part of it dated at 29,500 years, the other part of it at 44,000 years. Same animal. That's a pretty big disparity. Carbon dating, yes. Now, on this, they can't carbon date. They got to use other methods because it's older than 70 to 100,000 years as far as carbon dating can go. But this is a rock from Mount St. Helens. We saw it blow up in 1980, and a few years later, the dome started building up in there again, and so one of the creation scientists, Dr. Stephen Austin, went in there, and he had Dr. Rick Oliver carry this day site out for him. He took Rick Oliver along to be his mule, and they brought this day site out, and it dated at 350,000 years, excuse me. And then the feldspar was 340,000 years, and then the amphibole was 900,000 years, and then the pyroxene was 2,800,000 years in a rock that we knew was like 30 years old. So these are our radiometric dating techniques. Pretty trustworthy stuff, wouldn't you say? Radiocarbon is found in many things in many layers, presumed to be millions of years old. So here's some scientific stuff that gets squashed. It doesn't get publicized at all. So the rate, radioisotopes in the age of the Earth. How many of you have heard of the RATE project? Radioisotopes in the age of the Earth. A couple people. This happened right around 2000 What they found should have been headlines. If it was evolutionary proof, it would have been headlines. Nobody knows about it because it's squashed. So these guys said, if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, we should find carbon-14 in coal and diamonds. Okay? So they tested it. They hadn't been tested before because they knew it was millions of years old. They didn't test it because they knew it was millions of years old, because it was where it was found in the rock layers. Well, all of these dated in the thousands. All of the rock layers, all of the ones in the Grand Canyon, in the thousands. Okay, this is Andrew Snelling. He works for Answers in Genesis now. And he said that fossils, coal, oil, natural gas, limestone, marble, and graphite from every flood-related geological layer, and even some pre-flood deposits, have all contained measurable amounts of radiocarbon. Once again, it can't do that after 70 to 100,000 years, depending on who you're going by. Pieces of fossilized wood in Oligocene, well, I won't read all those things, all those layers are supposedly 32 to 250 million years old. They all had measurable radiocarbon. They've never been tested before. They tested it. They found what they were suspecting would be there because they knew that the Earth wasn't that old. And this is the one that is pretty sad what they did with these guys. This is a scientific team, and they said, well, let's go ahead and see if we can radiocarbon date any dinosaur bones. So they took all these dinosaur bones from all these different places, and they dated them, and they found out that they all dated from 22 to 39,000 years old. Well, this is what happened to their research. John Whitcomb reported that the complete removal of this scientific study presentation is documented. The lecture by a paleochronology team was removed from the oral presentations on the conference website. Why? This team had carbon dated dinosaur bones and found them to be 22 to 39,000 years old. No fault was found with the study itself. This presentation was in August of 2012. So since then they repented so we could hear about it, right? No. If you go, well, I've never heard of this before, now you know why. I mean, it's suppressed. Sorry to say, Satan has a hold of a lot of things that it's hard to get through. The radiometric dating techniques do not give accurate dates for rocks of known age and give dates in the thousands for living organisms. This basalt from a volcanic eruption 200 years ago, dated at 22.8 million years. This basalt was 800 years old, dated at 13 million years, and Medicine Lake obsidian, less than 500 years old, dated at 12.6 million years. Sounds pretty reliable. Not. Shells from living snails were carbon dated and found to be 27,000 years old. Notice this is in Science magazine. Shells of living mollusks were carbon dated and found to be 23,000 years old. Science magazine. So, here's the question. If rocks of known age, radioisotope dating doesn't work, but we take rocks of unknown age and now they say it's working, it's accurate. Is that logical? Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. It's not logical, and this is another one of those areas where the blinders are on. That they want you to see something that's not there. Our mind fills in a rectangle when we look at this, but it's not there. There are many actual observations in the present that shows evidence that verifies the Earth is young, such as 90% of the processes that we use to date the age of the Earth gives an age of less than billions of years. That is important for refuting evolution, which needs billions of years. And the other 10%, guess which ones they are? Radiocarbon or radiometric dating techniques. So virtually, you got the unreliable ones, and then you got the other ones that don't give you billions of years. So we see bells in the ship that was sank in 1852 encased in solid rock. It doesn't take millions of years to form. This is cool. This is one of my favorite ones because it's actually a bag of flour. And this museum actually said this, which is unusual. It is commonly believed that petrification is a process taking millions of years. Not true. Under ideal conditions, petrification can take place as few as 3 weeks. You're looking at parts of petrified flour sacks from the Blue Spring Mill. It got flooded. They went and picked up these bags of flour, but they were rocks. They got petrified in 3 weeks. Rick Oliver says under the right conditions, he can petrify things in 1 or 2 days in the laboratory. It just takes the right conditions, not millions of years. Well, here's the one on diamonds that the rate team did. So they said, okay, diamonds supposed to be 1 to 2 billion years old. That's what we've always heard. But if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, they should have measurable amounts of carbon-14 in them. So they took 12 samples, and they found carbon-14 in every one of them, showing that they're not billions of years old for sure. And remember the unreliability of the radiometric dating techniques that gave us the 58,000 years. The rate team also showed that during the year of the flood, we know that some of the radiometric techniques were sped up. You know, the rate at which it decayed sped up during the year of the flood, and that skewed all the results that you get from that. But the most important reason to doubt radiometric dating is because it does not agree with what the plain reading of God's Word to man, the Holy Bible, tells us. So this is something I saw. I volunteered at Answers in Genesis for a month when I was first retired. I wanted to see if they were just a bunch of Christians trying to get your money, or if it was a God thing. It was a God thing. Ken Ham presented this, and I went, wow, why have I never heard this before? So I want you to hear it if you've never heard it before. So outside of Genesis chapter 1, because that's where the Bible's being attacked, of course, for the age of the earth, the day with the number 410 times outside of Genesis chapter 1 always means an ordinary day. Evening and morning together without day 38 times always means an ordinary day. Evening or morning together with day 23 times each always means an ordinary day. Night with day 52 times each always means an ordinary day. So these are called qualifiers that if you see them with the word day, it should always mean an ordinary day if you take all the rest of the Old Testament besides Genesis chapter 1. So when you read Genesis chapter 1, how could a person writing down what God is telling them make it any more plain that God meant those to be ordinary days? To me, that holds a lot more significance than all the scientific evidence. God said to Moses on Mount Sinai, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. So, you know, if you want to argue with God, go ahead. I don't choose to. Jesus said, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Some of the compromised views say that we went through evolution, and then these two primates got pretty advanced, and so God breathed the breath of life into them. They became Adam and Eve. But this doesn't say that. This says from the beginning of creation, Jesus is the creator. He should know, and I'm not going to argue with him either. If you believe Moses, this is Jesus talking, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe his writings, how you believe my words? He wants us to take it as a whole. He was in charge of those people that gave us our scriptures, picked out the books of the Bible that we needed to have in order to have faith in him. And Jesus also said, if I have spoken to you of earthly things and you do not believe, how then will you believe if I speak of heavenly things? So he told us how he created the earth, but a lot of people don't believe that. But they want to take the salvation message, but even people are messing with that nowadays. In Psalm, this is my philosophy. This is what I want to do. Teach me your way, O Lord. I will walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name. I will praise you, O Lord my God, with all my heart, and I will glorify your name forevermore. The compromised theories, in my estimation, in the way I see it, they are glorifying the scientists and trying to make the Bible agree with them. That's the wrong way to go about it. you're just showing that you don't trust God. You don't have faith in him when you do that. And that's a sad place to be. That's not where I want to be. Okay, the microbe demand theory of evolution violates several laws and well-established theories of science, plus it is often illogical. Okay? This is a really unique house. It's in Oklahoma. You know, they got lots of tornadoes in Oklahoma. It was in an empty field, and this tornado came through this empty field, and after everything's calmed down, this house was there with the lawn, with the shrubs, with the solar lights, with the sidewalks. It was all there. It came about from that tornado. You don't believe me? Very good. That's not logical, is it? It's not logical. You have to have plumbers, electricians, the guys to lay the cement for the sidewalk, the people who put the floors in, the roof in. You got all these people going in with all of our intellect and our skills that God has given us to make that house, and nobody would say that happened by accident if they were in their right mind. But yet you show an evolutionist this, and they say that happened by accident and by chance and random processes. Well, which one is really more complicated? Well, this plant doesn't rely on anybody to build anything. It just springs forth from a seed and becomes a tree that can make more seeds that produce more trees, and we get to eat the fruit. That's cool too. It has photosynthesis. It makes its own energy. It's off the grid. It's making its own energy. It stands up. It sucks food, its nutrients from the soil up against gravity. It is so complex in all the different types of cells and structures that it has, and just the fact that it can produce its own energy and reproduce itself without any outside interference makes it way more complex than the house. And yet an evolutionist has to say chance and random processes. Can't see that could be created. Hebrews says every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. He made the materials, right? The old joke, you know, I can do whatever God did. They start to make something, and the guy says, well, okay. He goes and grabs a handful of dirt, and the person says, go get your own dirt. God made everything. All of our building materials come from him. In Job 12:7-9, ask the beasts, they will teach you. The birds of the air, they will teach you. Speak to the earth, and it will teach you. And the fish of the sea will explain it to you. I was a physical education major, but I had to study the human body. And that's how it just naturally led into a biology minor and eventually to being a biology teacher. But as I studied the human body, it became apparent to me that anybody that believed that came about by chance and random processes had to have a few nuts running around loose in their head. Every system, every organ, every tissue taken by itself is so amazingly complex and awesomely designed that how can you possibly deny that it was made by a creator? And yet, they do. In the biology books, I mean, this one right here, we have no known way to add information to DNA, useful information to make like arms and legs and stuff. But this says right here in that last paragraph, new instructions on how to grow have been added to old instructions inherited from ancestors. That is a straight out lie in the biology book, because we've never seen a way for that to happen. And they call, in other places, they say that humans had gills and tails. You never had gills, you never had tails. You had your vertebral column that went past your body when you were an embryo, but your body grew into it, obviously. And what they call gills, we never used them for respiration. They did not make our lungs even. They made some things in your middle ear and some glands. And we've known that for a long time, but it's in the biology books that humans had gills and tails just like all the other animals when they're developing. Well, it's a sad state of affairs. There is no known law of nature, no known process of, and no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. That's what DNA is. It's an information system, and it can't just start up by itself. Werner Gitt, he was a Christian guy. He says, anybody that can falsify this statement, I'll give you $10,000. And he died never having to pay anybody because you can't falsify that. There's never been an example of that happening. This is an evolutionist, and he's the Natural History Museum of London. We think that apes separated from humans about 5 million years ago, although there's no fossil evidence of that period of separation. Okay, there's another one that says no evidence. Richard Leakey, a famous, guy that digs up humans, or he makes them into humans, but he dug up skull 1470. He was miffed. They didn't use his. They used this one that was Lucy, and he says mine was probably as older, and he would say if pressed, I would have to say there's more evidence to suggest an abrupt arrival of man rather than a gradual process of evolving. Amen, brother. Oh, wait, he's not a Christian. Anyway, he verified the Bible by what his observation was right there. And this guy, Stephen Jay Gould, of course, was one of the, in my estimation, 3 prominent evolutionists, not of this day, but the previous, my generation, kind of. And he says that biological arguments for racism have been common before 1850, but after the evolutionary theory came, then it really mushroomed. And he said, all this modern science shows us that races can be ranked on a scale of superiority. If this offends Christian morality or a sentimental belief in human unity, so be it. Science must be free to proclaim unpleasant truths. But then he went on to say, but the data were worthless if the chorus of racist arguments did not follow a constraint of data, must have reflected social prejudice, pure and simple. Very interesting statement from an evolutionist about our social prejudices coming from the evolutionary theory. Dr. Pilbeam says that these books and reviews have been used for him and other students, and he says we've been flailing about in the dark. Our database is too sparse, too slippery for it to be able to mold our theories. Rather, the theories more statements about us and ideology than the past. Paleoanthropology reveals more about how humans view themselves than it does about how humans came about. But that is heresy. That's an interesting word that we usually use for religious beliefs. I think that's what evolution is. So there's one. Those are horizontal and vertical lines that they mess up your eyes with the background. So other inconsistencies, the second law of thermodynamics is not compatible with evolution. The law of biogenesis is violated, that all living things came from other living things. Evolution goes against that. Cell theory is violated. The law of cause and effect, whatever the effect is, the cause has to be bigger. That's violated by evolution. Illogical, inconsistent, goes against actual scientific laws. So DNA is an intricate information system that shows there has to be a purposeful intelligence. So here's a hard drive, 340 gigabytes, not that big nowadays, but compared to DNA, is a lot more compact. How much more compact? 5 billion times more compact. Well, people would say, well, we got a lot bigger storage systems now. Well, we found out that DNA is 4-dimensional now, that it has a time element to it, that it switches on and off the same area of the DNA, the gene, for different things at different times. That's the newest findings. So guess what? DNA is 5 billion times, is much more complex than what we thought it was. So it's probably even bigger, the disparity now. DNA conclusions, since the density and complexity of the DNA is billions of times greater than man's present technology, we can conclude that the coder of the DNA information must be supremely intelligent. That is a rational conclusion. Remember, evolution says upward progression, and that requires the addition of new genetic information. How do we do that? We don't. It's never happened. They say we're 3% different from our nearest cousins. They never told you it's 90 million differences. They never told you that they only compared the parts that they saw that looked similar from the beginning, and they ignored the other parts, so now it's more like 30 million differences. 30%, not 30 million. 30% different. So multiply the 90 million times 10. Those are circles, not spiral. Another thing where they're just telling you something and they don't tell you the whole story and they want you to believe something that's not really there. So humans are a special creation, not a product of evolution. We're on the planet of the humans who believe they're related to the apes. If only this was science fiction. Well, everywhere you go, you take your kids to a museum, you're going to see stuff like this. We belong to the ape family. So they put a hairy human foot and a human foot and tell you, look, you came from that. That's not what ape foots look like. On my other presentation, I show you what they look like, and it's nothing like that. So, is that your grandpa? Is that your grandma? Well, Lucy was found, and she had no hands or feet, the original skeleton, and yet they decided to give her human hands and feet and put her into a museum like this one in St. Louis. They gave her a human-looking face. Those other ones I said was your grandma and grandpa that you can't see when they're looking straight ahead, the whites of their eyes. You can with Lucy here, so they did everything they could to make it look like an in-between. They put human feet on her, actually human legs, just kind of hairy. She hasn't found the razor yet. But the St. Louis Zoo has this on display. No feet or hand bones were found. We have found them now, and they were ape-like, and she had a locking wrist, meaning she was a knuckle walker. Okay? So this is for indoctrination, because Dr. Minton brought this up to this guy from the St. Louis Zoo, and the director of education, and he says zoo officials have no plans to knuckle under for the new information that they got, that their hands should look like that. We cannot be updating every exhibit based on every new piece of evidence. We look at the overall exhibit and the impression it creates. We think the overall impression that this exhibit creates is correct. So all these school kids are going by Lucy, looking at that going, oh yeah, look at that. We did come from that, didn't we? It's the impression they want to present. They don't care about the truth. They want to present what they think is right. This is in the Creation Museum. They built Lucy. They put the actual bone size in a hologram that you can press the button. It goes to different parts of the body. And she's a knuckle-walking ape. So we know that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. So we send our fearfully and wonderfully made kids to the public schools where they can't hear about creation or see creation or speak about the Creator. They're not allowed to. I mean, when I left the high school, when I left the high school, it took a couple of years that somebody got in there who wouldn't allow anybody to do an extra credit on the scientific evidence that creation, viewed from a creationist standpoint, would not do it, couldn't do it, don't talk about it. It's probably as good a thing because he couldn't have, they're not versed on creation anyway. They'd give you a false impression. So I told all my Christian school students, my homeschool students, I want you to know more about evolution than the public school student. But I'm going to also tell you about creation, because I'm not afraid of putting them both side by side. I know which one you'll know is the truth. And evolution can be harmful if swallowed, because it's done many harmful things in our world, from this evolutionary tree for humans of superior races that Darwin called them. And from that we get horrible things like digging up graves because we think that they're less evolved. And we got people who are infatuated with Darwin's principles, and they killed millions upon millions of people. And now we have eugenics popping up again. the applied science or biological movement which advocates the use of practices aimed at improving the genetic composition of a population. I wish we knew how the COVID-19 started, because it's killing all the old people and the people with health defects. It's kind of like getting rid of what they call the useless eaters. Be interesting to find out. And abortion, the abortion clinics don't want the woman to see an ultrasound of that baby, because 70% of the time when they do that, they don't do the abortion. They tell them that it's just retracing its evolutionary history. We're just removing a fish, not a human being. The most merciful thing that a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. That's the founder of Planned Parenthood. She's got other bad ones. That's just one I picked out. In Genesis, it says, "Let us make God in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. We have a special place in creation. We need to remember that. And we need to have communion with this God who wants to have communion with us. So the full passage, "You formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works. And that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth." That's what they called the womb. That's kind of their colloquial, never mind, you know that word. "Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed. And in your book they were all written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there was none of them." So from the day of conception to our day of death, God's looking on us. He sees us. He knows us. He's completely aware of us and what we do, according to Scripture. And God also said that he made from one blood every nation of men, that you can take a transfusion from anybody in this world, because we're all related. And the Human Genome Project verified that the most diverse human beings on the earth are 99.8% similar, 0.2% of a percent different. And the racial characteristics are 0.012% different, negligible, shouldn't even be talked about. So the biological fact, all humans belong to one race. God did say, "Don't be unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? What communion hath light with darkness?" And so we're talking about, when we're talking about skin tones, there's nothing in the Bible about marrying somebody with a different skin tone. What's in the Bible is a worshiper of Jehovah wasn't supposed to marry an idol-worshiping person in the countries around them. And a Christian is not supposed to be marrying a non-Christian. That's the gist of what God taught in his word. So we got a lot of false teachings that come out of, and they say they're using the Bible. So if you try to count the black dots, and when you try to count them, they should kind of move around and disappear and be all over the place. You can't really count them. Well, in my view, that's exactly what evolution is. When you really look at it, you realize it's just a bunch of drawings and things that scientists tell you that you have to believe in order to be intelligent. So, getting to the end here, Marvin Lubenow, who is a Christian guy, "The true difference between evolution and creation is best determined by the value each places on human life. In evolution, the value of human life is practically zero. In creation, the value of human life is virtually infinite. It would not be stretching it too far to say the difference between evolution and creation is the difference between zero and infinity. Our being created in the image of God, the very thing that Darwin tried to erase, makes the difference. And that's why this is important." So, the earth is not your mother. an ape-like creature is not your father. But all these people on the earth, they're your brothers and sisters. Biologically, and we pray, and hopefully someday spiritually, they will also be our brothers and sisters. In Romans it says, for ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God is like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. Man, do we see that? It's just increasing in our world today. Well, I always tell people, if you find yourself that you were one of those people that had denied God all this time and now you realize his word is true, please don't beat yourself up. It does no good to do that. It hurts too. Beware of those whose faith is based on their own ideas, feelings, and what they think is right, rather than on what God's word says. Now, I've done everything up to now for this last slide. Because all of the Bible is true, we should take this passage very seriously. If we receive the witness of men, the witness of God is better. That's what I've been trying to show you all night long. For this is the witness of God which he has testified of his Son. He who believes in the Son of God has the witness in himself. He who does not believe God has made him a liar, because he has not believed the testimony that God has given of his Son. And this is the testimony, that God has given us eternal life, and this life is in his Son. He who has the Son has life, and he who does not have the Son of God does not have life. That's the truth. All paths don't lead to heaven, but they do lead to God. But he's going to be the judge. You will be judged about what you did with Jesus while you were on this earth. And so we can apply the Bible to our thinking in every area. That's what this is all about, 8 different areas. And the Bible is awesome in accuracy of content, prophecy, archaeology is our friend, and it's withstood all opposition and Satan trying to destroy it all these years. But the most amazing thing about the Bible is it continues to change lives from the inside out. That is the most undeniable truth from the Bible, as we see these people being radically changed from the sinful life to the life with Jesus. If anybody wants more information, in the black up here, it'll tell you about where you can go, and my testimony's on that website. And every Monday at 6:30 at Calvary Chapel, I do creation science classes, and I'm going to give my whole expanded talk on the 10 reasons to doubt radiometric dating on this coming Monday. If you'd like to come and join us, there's several churches, people that meet there just like in here. So we're just there to promote God and the Bible and his word. So you guys know about Arizona Origin Science Association, but there are some websites, and they are on those papers. Don't forget about the papers as you leave. Thank you, and God bless you all.